Toronto FC's 2022 campaign kicks off this Saturday in Dallas. And this is the first season under new head coach and manager Bob Bradley. Bradley's done a full-scale rebuild of the TFC roster this offseason, which means that this year's TFC roster and lineup is going to look a lot different than anything we have seen in the past few years from Toronto FC. So I'm going to be predicting the starting lineup that TFC is going to run most often this season and the subs in order of how much they are going to make appearances. Now keep in mind, this is the long-term, fully everyone healthy best 11 that I think TFC can play, not who I think is going to play opening weekend and not who I think out of who's currently healthy is going to be playing. So we're going to start things off in net where I think our starting keeper is going to be Quentin Westberg. Westberg had a rough start to the 2021 season under Chris Armas and never really got his form back. I think fully healthy to start off this season, we are going to see a return to form from Quentin, and I think under Bob Bradley he is going to have a true opportunity to recapture the #1 role, because I think a fully informed Quentin Westberg is better than a fully informed Alex Botto, although it is a very close matchup, and I wouldn't be surprised if, at least at the very beginning of the season, we see a lot of rotating starts between the two of them. Moving on to the defenders. Now, I'm assuming Toronto FC is going to be playing a 4-3-3, which is what it looks like they've been playing for the most part in training camp. Now, the defenders is the reason why I've waited so long to make this video, because I was pretty sure we were going to sign more fullbacks after all of our old fullbacks have departed from the team. However, that does not seem to be the case, and so we have some interesting guys at fullback who it seems like Bob Bradley is leaning towards playing in the preseason. So my back four is as follows. Now the center backs are easy. Chris Mavinga has been TFC's best center back for years straight, and Carlos Salcedo, of course, is a designated player signing. So those two right off the bat are the two easy starting center backs, and probably the most solid center back duo TFC has had maybe ever. The fullbacks is where it gets interesting. This is what Bob Bradley's been playing in training camp, and given that we have not brought anyone else in, I don't see it changing into the regular season, and it seems to be who he is expecting to play throughout the entire regular season. Jacob Schaffelberg at left back. Now that actually makes a bit of sense, because Schaffelberg last season proved that he's good enough to be starting pretty much every single game in Major League Soccer. And with the addition of Insigne, who's going to be coming in July, Insigne plays the same left wing position that Schaffelberg made his own last season. So when Insigne shows up, Schaffelberg isn't going to be starting if he is still a left winger. Now, he's still young and still developing as a player, so it is possible that he is able to transition into left back quite well, and I think if he accustoms himself to the role well, this is where he'll get the most minutes this season. On the other side, Marshall-Rutty is a very interesting choice. Yes, he is a very, very talented 17-year-old, but he's a guy who is mostly a right winger, at least. I mean, at the age of 17, they're pretty fluent in what positions they can play in. Marshall-Rutty, though, I mean, if it works, it'll be fantastic. But to give a 17-year-old that responsibility, to tell a 17-year-old to have the defensive structure to play in a fullback role, that's very difficult and it's a very tough task. So if Marshall-Rutty can accustom himself to this role well, that is huge for his stock. It's just going to be interesting to see if he acclimatizes himself to this role well. And I mean, if it ends up working out well, Bradley's a genius. Also, Caden Chun, the right back from Pacific, has been training with Toronto FC throughout the whole preseason, and it's rumored that he is actually going to sign for Toronto FC. So if that happens, then at least Toronto FC has some insurance on the right back role. Also, Salcedo, desperate times, could transition into a right back role as he's played there for the Mexican national team. But to start things off, and I think the long-term goal for Bob Bradley is to play Marshall-Rutty as the starting right back. Moving on to the midfield three. The midfield is the only position that really looks unchanged from previous seasons for TFC. Of course, the captain, Michael Bradley, is in there, especially with his dad being the coach. Jonathan Osorio has really, in the past few seasons, turned into a very solid ball-winning midfielder. So to play him as one of the further back two midfielders in a midfield three, I think is a role that he has grown very well into. And then Alejandro Pozuelo, of course, the designated player, our MVP in 2020. He had a rough 2021, but I think a fully healthy, mentally sound Pozuelo coming into 2022 is going to be back to his dominant self in Major League Soccer, especially considering that the level of talent around him seems to have increased from last season. So the midfield three stays pretty similar as to what it has been in years past. However, with Michael Bradley aging, I could see him being rotated out and Ralph Priso and Noble Okello getting some regular starts in there. But I think, if you're coming to a big game, this is what gets played for Toronto FC. And now moving on to the strikers. So of course you're going to notice at the left wing role, I have Insigne in brackets above Jayden Nelson. That's because Insigne is not showing up till July. When he comes, obviously he is going to be the starting left winger. But until that moment, I think Jayden Nelson is going to be the main left winger for the first half of the season. Apparently he's been very good in training camp, and with Jacob Schaffelberg moving back to the left back role, it opens the left wing up for Jayden Nelson to slot in and get a regular shift. Of course, once Insigne shows up, that position becomes really obviously his. So, him in brackets up there just saying, he's coming, but for right now and until midway through the season, it's Jayden Nelson's role. Striker is interesting a bit because we did go out and get Jesus Jimenez. However, I think Ayo Akinola is still the long-term first choice striker for the team and the present first choice striker for the team. So I think we could get something similar to a Westberg-Bono situation where at the beginning of the season they kind of trade Starks and whatnot, but I think down the road, long-term, Ayo Akinola is going to be getting more Starks than not in the striker role. And finally, right wing. This is probably the most contested position in the TFC roster right now, because I have Ifeanachi Achara in there right now, but there are a lot of guys on this TFC team that could end up playing that right wing spot. Achara I have in there because he's the guy who I think we've seen play the most for Toronto FC so far, and so, a bit of a familiarity advantage to him. However, with a new coach, that doesn't really matter that much. DeAndre Carr, who we just signed as a homegrown player in the offseason, is a very possible player to fill out that role. Also, Marshall-Rutty can move up into that role too. Jayden Nelson, once Insigne comes, could slide over. Really, that could go to anyone. But for the time being, I think down the road this season, Achara is my favorite to really make that spot his own. I think we're going to see big things from Achara this season. And honestly, he's the guy who I think I want to see there more than anyone else. So now we're going to move on to the subs. I'm going to list each position, and I'm just kind of going to, in order of how much playtime I think they're going to get, list them down in order. So, moving down the list, at striker, Jesus Jimenez obviously is, I think, the number 2 striker. I already talked about how I think him and Akinola are kind of going to be splitting starts to start the season, but Akinola is going to move into that role, but Jimenez is going to be our obvious number 2 option. Jordan Perugza has had a good training camp, and I think we're going to see a lot more of him this season, especially without Mullins and Dwyer kind of murking the path for him. I think Perugza is going to get solid substitute minutes, and we'll see quite a bit of him this season. On the wing, this is again kind of messy because, a lot of our wingers are playing fullback in this formation, so Marshall-Rutty obviously could play right wing, Schaffelberg obviously can play left wing, and once Insigne comes, Jayden Nelson obviously is going to move to the first spot on the bench here. DeAndre Carr has had a pretty solid training camp, and I could see him getting a regular shot at one of the 2 wing positions too. He's kind of the only guy we have regularly as a full-time winger in the subs though. Jimenez also can play the wing a bit, so I wouldn't be surprised if we see him out wide a few times this season. Midfield, Ralph Priso last season prior to his injury was really turning on, and that injury was so unfortunate for him. I think this season he's going to come back, be right back where he was, and if that happens, he could very easily be challenging for a starting 11 role on this team regularly. So Ralph Priso is going to be basically, of all the subs, I think Ralph Priso is the most likely to end up in the starting lineup of what I have right here. Noble Okello, another guy like Priso, young, he's going to be stepping up into this roster more and more this season, I think, as it goes on, and just more than he has in past years. So Okello is another very solid option off the bench, and a guy who could probably start here or there, no problems. Fullback. Again, very thin for TFC in the fullback role right now. Caden Chun I have here with a question mark because we might are most likely getting him. From what I can tell, it's basically a done deal, but just isn't official yet. So I have Caden Chun written down as on this lineup. I don't have a question mark next to his name because Probably, but not 100% confirmed yet. Luca Petrasso, another young homegrown player that TFC signed who could play as left back. He'll get minutes just off of the fact that we literally have no other fullbacks. Center backs, Shane O'Neill, brought in to be the number 3 center back, I think, pretty obvious. He'll be getting the most minutes, get the rotational start here or there, be the first guy in if one of Mavinga or Salcedo gets injured, unless Lucas McNaughton seriously impresses the Pacific man. Honestly, that number 3 center back role is McNaughton's to take, and he could very easily sit for Shane O'Neill. I think going off of the MLS experience, O'Neill has the edge right now, but McNaughton, if he impresses, it could be his, and in which case he could get more minutes. But I feel like both of these guys are going to get solid minutes in MLS this season. Luke Singh, another guy, question mark next to his name, because originally he was supposed to be loaned out to Pacific in return for McNaughton, and then that deal fell through. Like, it was pretty much confirmed, everyone was announcing it, and then it fell through and he came back to Toronto FC. So TFC, as far as I know, is still looking for a loan option for Singh this season, but as of right now, he is still on the Toronto FC roster. So I wouldn't be surprised if at least to start the season he gets some minutes for TFC and then they loan him out somewhere. But it'll be interesting to see what happens with him, because if he's on TFC this season, he has to be getting minutes. And of course, goalkeepers, Alex Bono, again, I mean, the goalkeeper role has been consistent for years now for TFC. So Bono, obviously the backup. Ranjit Singh is the new guy brought in to be the 3rd string keeper. I don't remember the last time a TFC 3rd string keeper actually played for TFC, so I don't think we're ever going to see him. Going to be split between Westberg and Bono unless something goes really wrong in the injury front. But he's on the roster, so might as well mention him. He's a Sigma product too, so it's going to be interesting to see if he goes to Forge after this stint. So that is the TFC predicted lineup for this season. Now, if you notice, removing Insigne, there's only 23 players on the roster right now, which for Major League Soccer is light. And with an extra international roster spot open, guaranteed at least some of this is going to change, as new guys are more than likely going to be brought in. But for right now, for who Toronto FC has on the roster at this moment for this coming season, this is what I think the most likely best starting 11 is going to be. Honestly, this I like for multiple reasons. One, I like the guys that we've brought in, the big international signings that we've brought in to try and bolster this team, but also this is without a doubt the most Canadian heavy Toronto FC team I've seen. Akinola, Nelson, Azorio, Schaffelberg, Marshall-Rutty, all Canadians. On the bench, Peruxa, Carr, Prizo, Akello, Chun, Petrasso, McNaughton, Singh, Ranjit Singh, all Canadian talent. This is a very, very Canadian heavy TFC team. And I feel like a lot of the American influence on this team is very much gone. Who do we even have that is American? I mean, Akinola kinda, Bradley, Westberg, Bono, O'Neill. That's kind of it. Like, this is a very, very Canadian heavy Major League Soccer team. And I think that really shows just how far the Canadian program has come in the last few years, because, I mean, in the past, Nelson, Akinola, Marshall-Rutty, Schaffelberg, these guys would all be regulars on the Canadian national team. And now, like, the only guy here who's, confirmed to make it every time is Azorio. So the fact that TFC could come out now and run 5 starters, plus most of their subs that are Canadians, that aren't even regulars on the Canadian national team, that really shows just how far in the past 5 years the Canadian national team has come, and how fast and far and how fast the soccer program in Canada has improved. And honestly, if this works, we might be seeing an era where TFC is much more heavily reliant on the young guys they've brought up through their academy, on the young Canadians they've brought up through their academy, and less so on Americans like Marky Delgado, like Omar Gonzalez, like Eric Zavaleta, who they've just kind of brought in with MLS experience to bolster up the roster. So this is kind of a experiment for TFC, and like with Bob Bradley being the coach, obviously this is a team that's built to be competitive in Major League Soccer this season, but it's also a bit of an experiment of, instead of bringing in, depth MLS guys who are kind of like, regulars in Major League Soccer to fill out your lineup, give the young guys that you've developed a chance, because there's a very high chance that they are better. So despite all the big news being brought in and big names and excitement around guys like Insigne and Salcedo being brought in for Toronto FC, really this season is a true test of, is putting a high amount of faith in your own academy players going to pan out? And honestly, I like our chances. So that does it for this video. Let me know down below in the comments what you think of this TFC roster and what you think I've gotten wrong. As always, if you like this video, hit like. If you want to see more of my stuff, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter. Link is down below in the description, and I will see you next time.